After work, a man returned to his hotel, turned on a movie, and snacked casually, unwinding just like any other evening. No one could have imagined that this seemingly mundane moment would become the last night of his life. It wasn't until the next morning that he was found lying unconscious on the floor. The door locked from the inside, the windows sealed, and no signs of struggle or disturbance in the room. The scene was eerily silent, almost as if this death was never meant to happen at all. On September 16, 2010, in Beaumont, Texas, a seemingly ordinary business hotel room became the scene of a baffling death. Gregory Fleniken, a corporate executive who frequently traveled to the area for work, was discovered lifeless by colleagues in his room. The door was locked from the inside, there were no signs of a struggle, and no evidence of anyone else entering. The scene initially appeared to be nothing more than a sudden, natural death. At first, both police and medical personnel thought just that. The room was tidy, the body showed no external injuries or blood, and there were no clues pointing to foul play. But a deeper forensic examination revealed a shocking truth. Fleniken had severe internal injuries far beyond what could be caused by a simple fall or natural illness. Injuries of this magnitude are typically only seen in cases of extreme impact or violent assault. Suddenly, the case took a dramatic turn. What first seemed like a straightforward natural death became a mysterious and suspicious homicide. Investigators could neither explain the source of the injuries nor find a weapon or any suspect. Even stranger, Fleniken had been alone in the room, with all doors and windows sealed and no evidence of anyone entering or leaving. This locked room death, a crime that seemed nearly impossible, immediately hit a dead end in the investigation. At 55, Gregory Fleniken was, to most of his family and friends, the embodiment of a self-made man. Straightforward and decisive by nature, he had spent his early years as a chief engineer aboard ocean-going vessels, living a disciplined life at sea surrounded by machinery and waves, constantly facing danger. Those years not only forged his resilient, calm demeanor, but also equipped him with the technical skills and capital that would later fuel his entrepreneurial ventures. Entering middle age, he decided to leave the sea behind to spend more time with his wife. But retirement from maritime life didn't mean settling for a quiet, predictable routine. Spotting the growth potential in the energy sector, he founded a company in Beaumont, Texas, immersing himself in the oil and energy business. The city, which had flourished since the early 20th century thanks to oil discoveries, remained a hub of industry, a magnet for ambitious entrepreneurs like him. Gregory's family lived in Lafayette, and for years he maintained a strict, steady rhythm. Every Monday morning, he drove over 200 miles to work, staying in a long-term hotel in Beaumont from Monday through Thursday nights before returning home Friday evening to reunite with his wife. This pattern of commuting had continued for years without incident. Colleagues described him as kind and reliable, with virtually no history of conflict. His wife knew his habits weren't particularly healthy. He smoked, drank occasionally, didn't exercise much, and rarely saw a doctor, but his overall mental and physical condition had always seemed solid, with no signs of serious illness. So when police initially suggested his death might have been due to a sudden medical event, his family, though shocked, reluctantly accepted the explanation. Yet no one could have imagined that this seemingly ordinary, and even slightly monotonous life would end abruptly in a familiar hotel room. Even more unsettling, it soon became clear that Gregory Fleniken's death was far more complicated than it initially appeared. When police completed their initial on-site investigation, the case was almost immediately considered a suspected natural death. The door was locked from the inside, windows tightly shut, valuables untouched, and there were no signs of a struggle, conditions that together painted a convincing picture. The victim had likely suffered a sudden medical event while alone, but the subsequent forensic autopsy completely upended that conclusion. From the first glance, the medical examiner noticed something unusual. Externally, Gregory's body showed almost no visible injuries, save for a few minor abrasions on his face, which could easily be mistaken for marks from a fall. However, a closer internal examination told a far different story. His internal organs had suffered severe damage, extending dangerously close to the heart. Injuries of this severity are almost impossible to produce from a simple fall or natural illness. They are consistent with extreme blunt force trauma. Adding to the mystery, the examiner found a subtle tear in the lower, more private region of his body. The location and nature of the wound initially suggested the possibility of a blunt instrument or a targeted kick. Yet if such external force had been applied, there should have been bruising or impact marks on the surface of the body, but Gregory's corpse was remarkably clean, with no visible external trauma at all. This severe internal injuries with no external trace scenario is so rare that even seasoned forensic experts admitted it was virtually unprecedented. With no further concrete evidence to pinpoint the cause, the examiner had no choice but to classify the death as resulting from undetermined blunt force trauma. A highly unusual conclusion acknowledging that the victim had indeed suffered lethal force, but its source remained unidentifiable. The release of this report instantly changed the case. Police had to retract their initial natural death ruling and officially treat it as a homicide investigation. But new questions immediately arose. If Gregory had been murdered, how could the perpetrator have committed the act inside what was essentially a locked room scenario and left without leaving a trace? The mystery didn't get any simpler. If anything, it became even deeper and more perplexing. Once the case was officially reclassified as a homicide, police immediately focused on a central question. Who had the opportunity to be near the victim? Naturally, the first person investigators scrutinized was his wife, Susie Fleniken. In most murder investigations, spouses are priority suspects because they logically have both motive and access. But the investigation quickly took a turn. On the night of the incident, Susie remained at home. There was no record of her leaving and no evidence that she had traveled to Beaumont. More importantly, she did not attempt to downplay the situation. Instead, she actively urged police to investigate thoroughly and find the truth. Her proactive attitude gradually convinced investigators that she was not involved, and she was formally cleared of suspicion. With family members ruled out, attention shifted to external individuals who might have entered the room that evening, starting with the hotel maintenance worker. Records confirmed that Gregory had reported an electrical issue, and the worker had indeed entered the room. Given her prior criminal record, she initially became a person of interest. Police theorized that a dispute during the repair could have escalated into something fatal. However, surveillance footage and staff testimonies confirmed she left immediately after completing the work and did not return. Polygraph tests also showed no anomalies. She too was cleared. Investigators then turned their attention to 3 refinery workers staying in the neighboring room. Earlier that night, they had been drinking, and a power outage had disrupted their room. The coincidence in timing aroused suspicion that, frustrated by the situation, they might have gone next door, potentially sparking a confrontation. Yet the 3 men's accounts were nearly identical. After the outage, they went downstairs to the hotel bar, a story confirmed by multiple patrons and bar staff. When they returned close to midnight, they only heard a few coughs from the neighboring room, noticing nothing unusual. With their statements corroborated by witnesses, police could only list them as uninvolved witnesses. By this point, nearly everyone who could have had access to Gregory had been investigated. There was no clear motive, no signs of conflict, no eyewitnesses, and no direct evidence. The case seemed to stall, as if all leads pointed toward one disturbing conclusion. The homicide might have occurred without a discernible perpetrator. Just as the investigation was about to go cold, the appearance of a private detective completely shifted the direction of the case. Just as the police investigation stalled and the case was on the verge of being filed as a cold, unsolvable mystery, a key figure emerged who would completely change the course of events: Ken Brennan, a veteran private detective from Florida. Renowned in the field for tackling the most perplexing cases, Brennan had worked on multiple bizarre, long unsolved homicides and was often dubbed a real-life Sherlock Holmes by his peers. Encouraged by friends, the victim's wife reached out to him in a last-ditch effort. What began as a tentative request for help quickly turned serious. After hearing the full details of the case, Brennan agreed to take it on almost immediately. Unlike the police, he didn't rush to re-interview existing suspects. Instead, he returned to the investigation's most fundamental elements: the scene itself and the timeline of events. His first request was unexpected. He asked the wife to recall her feelings upon entering the room that day, not just what she saw. Though unconventional, this method is a staple among seasoned investigators, as sensory memory is often harder to overlook or unconsciously alter than visual memory. As she reflected, a small detail she hadn't noticed before suddenly came to mind. The room had felt unusually stuffy. This immediately caught Brennan's attention. The wife explained that her husband was always sensitive to heat and would normally set the air conditioning very low. If the room was stifling, it meant one thing. At some point, the AC had stopped working and had not been turned back on. This subtle clue instantly connected to earlier investigation records of the power outage repair. Brennan reasoned that if electricity had been restored later that evening while Gregory was still alive, he would have almost certainly turned the AC back on as the room heated up. But there was no evidence this had happened. In other words, his death likely occurred shortly after power was restored. The implication was profound. It cast doubt on previous witness statements. Guests in the neighboring room had claimed they still heard Gregory coughing around midnight. If Brennan's timeline was correct, either their memory was flawed or someone was lying. Brennan didn't rush to accuse anyone. Instead, he quietly noted the contradiction, fully aware that most major breakthroughs come not from new evidence but from inconsistencies in existing accounts. And at that moment, the first crack in the case had appeared. The investigation subtly shifted. What had once seemed like a case with no perpetrator now pointed toward a more disturbing possibility. Someone was deliberately concealing the truth. To test his timeline theory, Brennan decided to return to the crime scene with the police, the hotel room 348 in Beaumont, Texas. By now, several months had passed since the murder, and the room had been cleaned, renovated, and rented out again, appearing indistinguishable from any standard hotel room. To most, such a refurbished scene would seem to hold little forensic value, but Brennan knew better. The most crucial clues often hide in the most unassuming corners. Instead of immediately examining the bed or floor like most would, his attention went to the wall behind the door. There was a tiny dent, previously dismissed as a mark caused by repeated contact with the doorknob. But when Brennan pushed the door fully to the wall to compare positions, he immediately realized something was wrong. The knob could never have reached that spot. At that moment, he understood. This wasn't just a dent, it was a perforation. Brennan requested that the neighboring room, 349, be inspected. When the police opened the door, everyone held their breath. On the opposite side of the wall, in the exact same position, there was another tiny hole crudely filled with tissue and toothpaste. It was so inconspicuous that it would have been almost impossible to notice without careful inspection. After carefully removing the filler, a circular hole less than 1 centimeter in diameter was revealed. The two rooms were connected by an almost invisible straight passage. Brennan then pulled out his laser pointer and aimed the beam through the hole from room 349. The red light shone directly across the wall and landed precisely on the left side of the bed in room 348, the exact spot where the victim had lain that night. Everyone present immediately understood the implication. This was no ordinary wall dent, it was a bullet hole. This discovery completely overturned previous assumptions about the case. The victim had likely not been attacked inside his room. Someone from the adjacent room had fired a shot that penetrated the wall and struck him. It explained both the absence of struggle at the scene and the forensic anomaly of severe internal injuries with no external bruising. Most importantly, it proved that the killer had never even been inside the victim's room. The once seemingly perfect locked room scenario had just been shattered. Although Gregory Fleniken's body had already been cremated, making it impossible to recover the bullet directly, a decisive breakthrough came from early forensic photographs. Brennan carefully examined these images and noticed a tiny but crucial detail: a minuscule entry wound at the location of Gregory's heart. At the time, this wound had been overlooked and possibly mistaken for damage from an unknown blunt object. This small observation explained why his body showed almost no bruising or external trauma, yet suffered severe internal injuries. It also confirmed that his death was not caused by a sudden illness or a fall. It had been a gunshot. When this discovery was paired with the tiny wall hole and verified with the laser pointer showing the bullet's trajectory aligning precisely with the left side of the bed, the chain of evidence fell into place. The wall in room 349 had become the bullet's path. The projectile had passed cleanly through the wall and struck the left side of the bed in room 348, and the forensic photos confirmed it pierced the heart, causing fatal damage. All these details finally revealed the truth. What had once been considered a locked room accident was, in fact, a tragic incident caused by a careless act of firing a gun while intoxicated. As the key pieces of evidence came together, police extended their investigation to Wisconsin to question the 3 electricians who had been in room 349 that night. Under mounting pressure and meticulous cross-examination, one of them finally broke down and revealed the full truth. The gun had been fired by Lance Mueller. Intoxicated and showing off a handgun, he accidentally discharged it, sending the bullet through the wall and straight into room 348, striking Gregory in the heart. Even more shocking was the trio's complete disregard for the aftermath. They neither checked the neighboring room to see if anyone had been hurt nor reported the incident. Instead, they hastily patched the wall hole with toothpaste, attempting to cover up the accident, and then returned to the bar to continue drinking, only realizing the fatal consequences the next day. This chain of reckless and selfish actions not only claimed an innocent life but also uncovered the true cause behind what had initially been considered a mysterious locked room death. Alcohol and negligence had combined to produce a tragic, preventable fatality. The case ultimately went to trial at the Jefferson County District Court. Initially, the prosecution charged Lance Mueller with murder, but after negotiations between both sides, the charge was reduced to manslaughter. In court, Mueller chose a strategic no-contest plea, neither admitting guilt nor defending himself, instead leaving the verdict to the court. This approach allowed him to avoid potential civil liability while preserving some legal flexibility. The court ultimately convicted Mueller of manslaughter and sentenced him to 10 years in prison, nearly the maximum penalty for the charge. During sentencing, the judge emphasized that this was far from a simple accident. Mueller and his companions' post-incident actions, hastily patching the wall, ignoring the consequences, and returning to drinking, exacerbated the severity of the case and demonstrated a blatant disregard for the victim's life, warranting a strict sentence to uphold justice. What makes this case so shocking isn't just the bizarre locked-room circumstances. It's the harsh, real-world lessons it reveals. First, initial appearances can be deceiving. When Gregory was found collapsed in his hotel room, everyone assumed a sudden illness or accident. Without persistent and thorough investigation, that mistaken conclusion would likely have gone unquestioned. Second, the smallest details can overturn an entire line of reasoning. The stifling heat in the room, a half-burned cigarette, the tiny hole in the wall, each seemingly trivial clue became a critical piece in uncovering the truth. If not for Susie Fleniken's relentless insistence and Ken Brennan's sharp instincts, this case might have been forever recorded as a natural death. It serves as a stark reminder that careful observation, persistent pursuit of the truth, and a commitment to justice are essential forces for protecting life and revealing the reality behind appearances.